Lunchtime, with thanks to Bord Gáis Energy, fixed unit rate electricity plans, keeping you in control of your business electricity costs.
The rape and the torture of children were downplayed or managed to uphold instead the primacy of the institution, its power, its standing and its reputation. Far from listening to evidence of humiliation and betrayal with St. Benedict's ear of the heart, the Vatican's reaction was to parse and analyse it with the gimlet eye of a canon lawyer.
And that was the voice of Enda Kenny speaking in Dáil Éireann on the 20th of July. He had taken a full week, 7 days, analysing the contents of the Cloyne report before he delivered his now famous speech. Now, the Vatican, as you know, with bizarre timing, put out a 25-page document in response to the Cloyne report at the weekend. The Taoiseach, Eamon Gilmore, has suggested the Vatican's response is, quote-unquote, very technical and legalistic. Patsy McGarry is the Irish Times Religious Affairs correspondent and he joins me now. Patsy, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, David.
Now, to describe this as being technical and legalistic is perhaps an understatement.
Absolutely, Damien. I mean, I find it interesting too that you brought up the question of the timing. I mean, it's very odd for such a document to be released on a non-working day, on a Saturday, without any notification. It would appear to this date. In normal context, protocol would dictate, and the Vatican is very conscious of protocols, that the state would be informed in advance when the document was due to be released. Probably would have been given a copy so it could prepare a response, but that didn't happen in this instance. You might say that's another indication of how bad relations are between the Vatican and this state currently.
Yeah, there used to be a joke in media circles, Patsy, that if you wanted something not covered properly, you put it out on Saturday afternoon when the Premiership matches were on. But the Vatican's timing is amazing in this instance. But to go to the net issue, Enda referred to the gimlet eye of the canon lawyer. The gimlet eye may have spotted possible chinks in Enda Kenny's own armour. Is that correct?
Well, it would appear so. In fact, Damien, there wasn't a Premiership game on this weekend, as you probably know, or a significant one. We had the All-Ireland hurling finals instead.
Yeah.
On the day after.
My apologies, yeah.
That's quite all right.
Yeah.
Yes, you could say that the gimlet eye has spotted some possible chinks in the Taoiseach's address. One dealing with his statement as all that the Vatican frustrated a statutory inquiry not 3 decades ago, but 3 years ago, which would appear to be more rhetorical than specific. And in fact, they want specific explanation by him, or from him, as to what he meant by this, as does the Archbishop of Dublin, Gerard Martin, which he underlined in interviews published or broadcast yesterday.
Yeah, but Patsy, are they playing good cop, bad cop here? Because, you know, Dermot Martin is one of the favourites in the media. He's seen as sort of the lone voice standing against the institution. So they give the hard line from Federico Lombardi in Rome. He puts the boot in, and then Dermot Martin comes out with precisely the same message, but delivered in different tones.
Well, Dermot Martin has spent 30 years in the Vatican diplomatic service, and he didn't do so for nothing. He is a very astute man, very politically skilled, and knows how to play these things very, very cleverly and very well. That is not for one iota minute to attack the man's integrity, because I think he's been quite outstanding on this issue and an exception among senior church figures, not only in this country but worldwide. But Damien, can I come back to the document itself?
Of course.
It ignores the very core issue that enraged the political establishment in this state when it came to the Vatican, and in particular the Murphy Commission. The Murphy Commission was set up by our Dáil, our Parliament, to investigate the allegations of clerical child sex abuse and their handling in Dublin by the Church and by the state, that's the Gardaí and the health authorities. In that capacity, it wrote to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, asking for whatever information it may have of relevance to it and to present it to the Commission. Now, it had a reason for doing so. In 2001, the then prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and currently Pope, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, wrote to every Catholic bishop in the world asking that he refer to him all credible allegations of clerical child sex abuse, and he and his congregation would decide how they be handled. That included Dublin. So the Commission wanted to know what he'd been sent from Dublin. The congregation didn't even respond to the Commission. It complained instead to the Department of Foreign Affairs that the Commission had not followed proper protocols and should have gone through adequate, appropriate diplomatic channels. Archbishop Martin indicated yesterday that it also said it would cooperate with the Commission, which was news to me and probably news to the Commission, because in addressing this matter in its report, that's the Murphy report published in November 2009, the Commission made no reference to the Vatican saying it would cooperate. It did explain that it couldn't use the state's diplomatic channels to secure information when it was also investigating the state itself. It didn't feel it was appropriate for it to do so. It could appear to be compromising itself. So what did it do? It then wrote to the papal nuncio, here in Dublin in 2007. They got no reply. It wrote again to the Papal Nuncio in 2009. It got no reply. When the report was published, the Papal Nuncio was summoned to appear before the Oireachtas Committee on Foreign Affairs. He refused to do so. When the Cloyne investigation got underway, and it was the same commission as investigating Cloyne, his remit had been extended to investigate Cloyne in January of 2009. It then wrote to the Papal Nuncio again, asking him to supply relevant information to do with Cloyne diocese. He wrote back on this occasion to say that he had no information that was of relevance to them. Now, you can understand why that would infuriate people in the political realm here in Ireland. Yet the Vatican document at this weekend completely ignored that very core.
There was no dealing with any of those substantive issues. There is an attempt to say that Enda Kenny used a selective quotation from Cardinal Ratzinger, now the Pope, dating from 1990 out of context, and that Ratzinger was giving this comment in the course of a much wider discourse on what is known as the magisterium of the Church. I think that's the sort of process whereby the Church is its own ruler, in a sense.
It establishes its teaching. I have to say, in that context, I do think the Taoiseach didn't behave properly. He did misquote. He quoted the Pope rather out of context and applied what the Pope was talking about, governance in a theological context, and the Taoiseach applied this to the Church's attitude to a democracy or behaving in civil society, saying the standards were different. What the Pope said, the standards of behaviour were different in the Church to those that applied in civil society. It was unfair of the Taoiseach to do that, but to be very honest about it, it is a minor criticism. It's
nitpicking, is it?
Utterly and completely.
Yeah. There is also reference to documents in the late 1990s and also to a man called Cardinal Hoyos, I think is his name.
This guy...
He ran the Congregation for the Clergy for a decade in the mid-90s to the mid-noughties, I think. And he actually pursued in his work, he went with this old-fashioned church theory that essentially you would defend the priest in instances like this where there was allegations of abuse. Is that right?
Cardinal Hoyos was prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, for the Congregation for Clergy, from 1996 to 2006. Speaking to me last December, Archbishop Jeremy Martin described that period when most Irish bishops were dealing with the Congregation for the Clergy as disastrous. Cardinal Hoyos was very old style. They say that one of the reasons that Cardinal Ratzinger circulated that letter in 2001 to all bishops was because they're trying to move responsibility for the handling of clerical child sex abuse away from that man to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Cardinal Hoyos arrived in Ireland for a meeting at Ross's Point in Sligo with the Irish bishops in 1998. This followed their guidelines being published in 1996, which he had found or didn't measure up where canon law was concerned and had moral and grave concerns about their mandatory reporting guidelines. At this meeting, according to the document of the weekend, he advised the Irish bishops to comply with with civil law as well. What the document of the weekend did not say was that this was a very contentious meeting, and that at that meeting, the then Archbishop of Dublin, Desmond Connell, thumped the table in frustration as Cardinal Hoyos insisted it was Vatican policy to defend the rights of the accused priest above all.
Sorry, Desmond Connell, who's an extreme, I think it's fair to say he's an old-fashioned traditionalist within the Church. He became so enraged by Cardinal Hoyos' attitude to defending priests who are accused of abuse that he actually thumped the table in front of him.
Absolutely, because the Cardinal was trying to emphasise, he was actually an Archbishop still at that stage, Archbishop Connell, that there had to be a greater emphasis on the victim of abuse, rather than that the defence of the priest shouldn't be at the detriment of the person who was abused. And Cardinal Hoyos would not be moved on this. This is addressed in the Murphy report itself, where the current Chancellor of the Dublin Archdiocese, Monsignor John Dolan, discussing this with the Murphy Commission, is reported by the Commission as having said that 1997 letter sent by Cardinal Hoyos placed the Irish bishops in an invidious position. He said it meant that any priest against whom they took action for clerical child sex abuse had a right of appeal to Rome and was most likely to succeed. And in fact, Damien, the previous year to that meeting, to that letter, in 1996 also, Cardinal Connell had direct experience of this. Tony Walsh was laicized by a tribunal he set up in 1992. Tony Walsh, who was probably one of the most notorious child abusers among the Dublin priests, appealed that decision to Rome. It took a number of years. In that period, he abused a child. The child's mother went to the guards, and Tony Walsh was successfully jailed as a result of the action. In the meantime, the Vatican decided to commute the decision in Dublin to laicize him to his spending 10 years in a monastery. When Tony Walsh had been convicted in the courts that first time, Cardinal Connell flew to Rome to have him laicized, which is what happened. Tony Walsh, if you might recall, was jailed for 16 years last December in a particularly horrific abuse.
Yeah, but the point is that Desmond Connell had to go to all the bother of flying to Rome to ensure that he was defrocked, essentially.
Absolutely. And I mean, what this letter does, the document of the weekend, is that it puts all the blame for what happened in Ireland on the Irish bishops. Now, the Irish bishops certainly bear a lot of responsibility for what happened here, but they are not solely responsible for it.
Patsy McGarry, a religious correspondent with the Irish Times, many thanks for explaining all this to us. And I'm sure we haven't heard the last of this because that was an official response to the Cloyne report that was issued bizarrely on Saturday afternoon.